Hey everyone, welcome to another AI conversation. I'm joined today by someone who's actually quite famous, at least in my view, si Dr. Guido David, mathematician, professor, and apparently it's a small world, no? He and my cousin Mike, shout out to Mike Ligot, know each other. So welcome to the show, Prof. Guido.
Shout out to Mike Ligut, and thank you for having me, Doc Ligut. So it's a pleasure to always share, whatever I can share, especially with other fellow, geeks or I mean, academics. But I don't mind sharing with anyone, even at this point in time. Sanay na ako how to sort of, try to laymanize concepts because frequently I talk to media people and ayun, so let's go. I'm happy to share with whatever I can share with you.
Yeah, I remember very recently I was a guest on your show, no, about a week
Yes.
ago. Maybe let's take it from there, no. Alam ko naputol yung time natin. We were talking about AI and how it's very it's widely used now. I was wondering what your perspectives are on artificial intelligence. Obviously, you have a mathematics background, so math is pretty much the building block of all of these models. Pero from your perspective, how did you react? It's been more than a year since ChatGPT became popular in the public eye, no? So as a math professor, as a data person, what was your reaction to ChatGPT and its popularity?
Well, of course, I guess like everyone else, I was surprised initially that this kind of AI based on generative models is already possible and it's already being used. Uh, Maybe I'm not so surprised by by its popularity, especially here in the Philippines. It's probably I mean this is probably one of the countries where it's most widely used by students. I don't have data to back that up, but I'm just guessing based on Filipino culture. Again, I think we tend to like using these kinds of devices. Um, yung AI per se, just thinking back 10 years ago, 5 years ago, the landscape is so much different.
Mhm.
Um, the science behind the AI is, it's probably been done, 50 years ago or maybe even before that. So it's all there. It's just that the reason it's taken off, oh my God, the theory came first, but of course now we have the hardware to go with that. Say even 10 years ago, the hardware was not quite up to the hardware that we have. So we're talking about processing power. Yung, yung silicon industry has boomed. I mean, I think if I remember 10 years ago, yeah, our computers were okay, but yung graphics card was not quite the same level. And we didn't have the storage capacities that we have now. Kasi if I remember yung flash drives ko nung, from maybe 10 years ago, mga few gigabytes lang.
Mhm.
Yung premium, you get 2 gigabytes of flash drive. Now you can get basically as big as a
Terabytes na
hard
yata.
drive,
You can do terabytes and
right? I think so.
Mm.
And now first, storage and cloud capabilities. We're talking about petabytes of data. So AI is really based on big data. So we need a lot of data to train these models. And a lot of it is parang these computer scientists, these mathematicians, data scientists are really just having fun with the data and saying, okay, let's see what we can do with the technology. Because the technology is there, and the technology behind most of the AI, there's the same. I mean, there's some nuances that are different from case to case. I mean, there are different types of algorithms, but generally, the technology is mostly very similar. It's just being applied to different um, aspects. But the generative AIs, was fairly new to me at that time. Okay, wow, okay. You could even get your AI to write code, so,
Yep.
which I might have not have thought was possible before. So it moved. It moved. I always say exponentially during the 5 years. So in a way, it's exciting, but also a bit scary how fast it's developing. And who knows, 5 years from now, I mean, I don't think we'll be plateauing in terms of the AI technology, applications. So I think there will be more to come. People will come up with new applications. I mean, of course, now we see self-driving cars. Actually, marami ng AI applications, but most people are not aware that they're AI. You know, um, I can't remember when image recognition first started. So Facebook, when people started tagging themselves, and people were excited at that time. So that was the new AI thing. And of course, people didn't realize that by tagging themselves, they were actually calibrating
The
the
model.
the model of Facebook. And that, I think that's the same reason they made ChatGPT available to the public, so that it can be, trained, essentially calibrated by the users, which is the public. So ganun din sa, that's why you don't see a lot of the um, uh, yung image tagging anymore sa Facebook, because I think they're probably,
They've cracked it na.
they cracked it na,
Mm.
and they probably reached some sort of limit, because based on my experience, yes, facial recognition could probably recognize, if you have a picture of Doc Ligot, if I take a screenshot of you, can probably recognize that. But it's not really that precise at recognizing. It may be able to recognize certain types of personalities easily. Yung maraming publicly available data. That's why, last time you were talking about uh, what do you call that in AI now? You just generate fake fake videos of someone like, Barack Obama or Donald Trump, mga common, because they have a lot of publicly available data.
Mm.
Maybe ako rin, maybe I have enough publicly available data for someone to make a fake video of myself. Um yeah, regarding your question, so in a way, yeah, surprised like most people, um excited by what's in store. I'm
Mhm.
not really super worried about AI becoming out of control like what they show in the movies. At least not yet. We don't have that kind of AI yet, where it's, I mean, maybe it can be smarter than us, but in the end, it's still run by traditional, power sources. If you unplug it, your AI is still gonna die.
Mhm.
So it's not like, so the matrix we're in, it's powered by essentially human. Uh, I can't remember which part of human byproduct it's powered by. But anyway, so ayan, I hope that answers the first
Yeah.
part.
Actually, what you've just shared makes me curious kasi uh mathematics is probably, I would say, divorced from the day-to-day life of most people. Kasi nga, I would say nga, some people might be even afraid of the math. Pero right now, we live in a world that is run by math. No? And I guess by association, run by data. So all of this is just data points, which is my passion naman. How do you, as a math professor, as a mathematician, view all of these changes, no, or all of these phenomena? Now at the end of the day, it's all mathematics, and I think further to that, large language models, surprisingly, have a very qualitative, parang application. It's all about words, all about documents. And I remember, especially in school, that's the divide, no, the humanities and the sciences, or the mathematics and the kind of the qualitative stuff. Pero now we have this large language model, which is run by math, pero it's influencing or potentially influencing the humanities, potentially influencing qualitative work. Ang daming mga tanong yun. Pero anyway, going back to the first part, how do you normally view? I mean, we want to get into the mind of someone like Prof. Guido as a mathematician. How do you normally view all of this stuff, knowing all of the math that runs it?
Yeah, and I've been a mathematician my whole life. I did my PhD actually in biomedical engineering, but it was still more or less applied math. And I
Mm.
was doing a computer program, uh, and it was biomechanics applications. I mean, math applied to medicine, so you can think of it, math and engineering. And I've always had the perspective that the world was yeah, it's governed by mathematics because the mathematical laws are laws. They hold anywhere. And I mean, yung physics, you could, I mean, physics laws, they could still be tweaked, and some are not still set in stone. Even Einstein's theories have not been uh, proven as a fact, although it's generally accepted. But for mathematics, uh, these are universal truths, and these are rigors. We're trained to think that way. And no, me personally, as an applied mathematician, I'm more of an applied guy than a theoretical guy. So um, it's not surprising for me to to view the have this worldview as everything's based on numbers. Because even taking apart the computers, I mean, we have GUI, we have Windows or Apple or whatever computer you're using, but everything is based on just the binary system, zeros and ones. It's just, I mean, but you can use computers to to edit, to write work, and now you can even use computers to paint, to make. I mean, everything's digital now. So painting, you can compose music in computers, but everything at the root of it is just really binary operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying numbers that are in zeros and ones. So, kumbaga, it's like if you go inside the computer brain, that's all you'll be seeing, zeros and ones. You won't be seeing uh, a picture of Doc Liga there, even though right now this is what we're seeing as the output, as the front end. But the back end, it's really full of zeros and ones. And in a way, referencing again to that movie, The Matrix,
Mm-hmm.
parang in a way they got part of it right. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm completely sold in the entire movie plot, but at least part of it na when si Neo, Keanu Reeves was sort of parang he finally saw the the complexity of the matrix. He was seeing these zeros and ones. You can see it now parang streaming down
Dun sa screen.
screen. Yeah,
Mm.
like or maybe I can't remember if it was actually zeros and ones or but just a bunch of numbers, maybe even decimal numbers. But really, it's like zeros and ones. So it's like parang if you're seeing behind what's going on, behind what's on the screen right now, a Zoom, Doc Ligot with his outer space background,
Hmm.
everything behind it will be zeros and ones. So yeah, yeah. Even chemistry, even biology can be related to mathematics at the core. And ganun din. I mean, I, I did a lot of work during the pandemic, which hopefully, we could talk a little bit about later. Magsa-segue tayo. But of course, that one was based on numbers then, making projections of cases. That's actually a simpler example than computers. And for AI, ganun din. At the root of it, everything is just based on these algorithms and even large language models. I mean, they just found a good way to map words and expressions to numbers. And that, but of course, these are really large models. Or I mean, we're talking. I think some of the foundation models we look at or normally use these billions of parameters. So that means these are really large mathematical models, but still based on essentially numbers.
Actually, that's one thing na, syempre, if we get a bit philosophical about it. Um, and I think this is part of the public, I guess, not necessarily debate, or could be a debate, a public adjustment with yung notion of via a language model, which is essentially just sequences, di ba, of words, no? And then later, yung ganun din yung ano yung image generation AI, like Mid-Journey, uh, but instead of sequences of words, it's the actual components of a photo. they're all run by mathematical embeddings. So I guess the philosophical question for me, as a non-mathematician, is the notion that even things like creativity, stories, 'di ba? If you decompose it, pwede pala siyang mathematical. And it runs quite, I would say, contrary to what you would be intuitively thinking na, yeah, these are things that are beyond calculation. These are things that are beyond, you know, formulas. Uh, I'm just reacting to what you're sharing. Tapos, there's that notion of ano eh, I'm sure you've heard of the term stochastic parrots. Sounds like a very derogatory term actually, which is all these machines are doing, these large language models are doing, is just predicting words no, that come out of patterns. Pero hindi eh. Kasi, or maybe yeah, they do that, but because you're doing that, you can now tell stories. You can now make arguments. You can ask ChatGPT for a reaction to an article. 'Di ba? Parang really at the base of that lang pala is a formula that determines word sequences, no. I find that such a big, for me, philosophical jump. I don't know where you want to air on that, no. I mean, do you have a view on that na these things pala could be mathematical, or is that something that you've always known all along?
Well, yeah, I've always thought they would all be mathematical, but the possibility still surprised me. Na okay, I mean, I know we could develop computer programs based on math, visual cues, but the possibility of this, like I said, the generative AI itself is so surprising to me now. Because I mean, a lot of these AI problems, machine learning problems, like classification. I mean, it's fairly easy to philosophically visualize it as a math problem. But generative AI, wherein you have more of a, it's like you said, it's pattern recognition and extrapolation from existing patterns and from these new patterns. And so you're teaching basically the computer to view something that it hasn't encountered before and make the correct inferences. So that's the difference between generative and traditional machine learning. And traditional ones, basically the computer learns from patterns, but it can only act on these patterns. So you show it, you're showing a classification. Is this a dog or a cat? If you show it a picture
Mm.
of a dog, a picture of a cat, but sometimes you could show it a picture of a horse, and then it will not have an idea what that is. It may think it's a dog because it has something similar to a dog, or it may think it is a cat because it's something similar to cat, because it's only trained that way. So it can only work within those confines. But now we're talking of something that can move out of that confines and make it more generally trained. And this is important for let's say self-driving cars, because self-driving cars, the way they train it, as I saw it, I mean, we haven't done that anything like that in the Philippines. We don't have self-driving cars, but they let the AI watch something like almost like a simulation,
Mm.
like a computer game. You have a terrain, you're on the road, and it's making these adjustments and everything. But of course, the road is something that is familiar to it. But what if it encounters something that's not familiar, not part of the training? How will it extrapolate on that? And that's why this is the generative part is important for applications like that. Because you can have 99% accuracy. I mean, your AI can drive for you, but once it encounters something that's not part of the training, and that will definitely happen. I mean, something crosses, it doesn't know what it is.
Mm.
I mean, of course, it can see it as an obstacle, pero I mean, it might not know how to react, or it can get off the road and drive on a dirt road. Kunyari na bigla nawala yung road. How will it respond to that, or will it just stop and produce an error? Of course, you could have a fail safe like that, but and that's why this is important for AI moving forward. Having this kind of capability to move beyond what it's familiar with, and to go into something that you're actually, well, I can say it's being creative, but it is creating something. So
Hmm.
I mean, when maybe we can't attribute that as to, sorry, to its own creativity, but it's creating something. So I mean, and soon, and this, we're just in the, let's say, the infant stages of generative AI. Soon it will be creating much more than that. I foresee that in the future. I mean, maybe they won't acquire emotions because that's what some people believe. At some point these AI will have some emotions, because right now, I mean, initially ChatGPT didn't have any emotions. Parang, it's very robotic, as we are familiar with robotic, but as I haven't used it much recently, but from what I'm hearing, it's acquiring some sort of emotion or sentiment. And this is something that may be artificially trained for the AI. And at some point, they will acquire, emotions, or at least be trained to have empathy to
Hmm.
humans, and that will again move outside of just traditional training, because it will encounter new experiences, and it will learn how to react to that in new ways. So ayan, so sort of my take on that now. Inga. Well, it's again, it's exciting, but at the same time, like I said, I'm not really worried, but we have to wonder what's in store, because we're just in the infant stages and we're seeing this. So
Hmm.
what more within the next 5 years, 10 years? I mean, the past. I mean, from the 90s to 2010. I mean, I won't say technology was stagnant. I mean, but we didn't see something that was quite new. I mean, yeah, we had computers. They just built faster and faster computers, quantum computing. So I thought, okay, well, or yeah, we have faster applications, faster games, but everything was just built to be faster and more efficient. But suddenly now we're seeing something new that will actually impact all of us in the future.
I have a, and of course, feel free to react. Um, I have a take on this, and that's why, although I'm quite noisy also about the ethics of AI, which we can touch later on. Maybe we'll connect it to your COVID experience then. No? In a way, I've adopted, and I might not be articulating it properly, so let me know if you can help me with this. In a way, I've already crossed a certain philosophical parang threshold that uh, humans tend to, throughout history, have a love-hate relationship every time technology moves up the ladder closer to what humans can do, and kind of, I think we're near that boundary, because you say, it's a robotic thing, humans have emotions, things like that, no? It can do a closed system kind of problem like chess, but humans exist in an open system, something like that. And then now, as these technologies get better and better, even the way, if we geek out a bit, the machine learning for these models work is different na nga, as you said, from traditional machine learning, no? Kunyari, you do a classification problem. It's essentially just a more complicated regression, di ba? Parang
Yeah, it
there's a
is.
there's a data and then coefficients
Right.
eventually have an outcome. But these models, actually, there are two. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with this. It started with autoencoders. You have an encoder and a decoder. So even the way these machine learning models for these types of generative AI
Hmm.
work is different. Parang just for the listeners, no, autoencoders are two models actually, and the goal is to replicate an original data point. Like when you have a picture of a cat, you find a way to compress it, and then a second model decompresses it to the original. And syempre, the information loss determines how well your model replicates it. But what people intuitively realized, it's that compression process pala that's essential, because in a way it's kind of like a dimensional reduction
Dimensional
technique.
reduction. Yeah.
Oh. And then yun yung secret sauce. Kasi ngayon, these transformers are just basically complicated autoencoders where somehow they're able to derive some multidimensional representation of pretty much every word and or words and photos to the point that you can now write any other word after you've given that word. No, so anyway, where am I going with this? That new architecture, which is not new, it's pretty old, pero the way sabi mo hardware had something to do with
Yeah.
it, now allows machines to get now to this almost level of competence with pretty much anything. Now, where did I cross over, as I said, philosophically? I tend to think now that anything that we keep saying, hindi kaya ng machine yan, tao lang yan, is for me akin to parang you're viewing an image, and we're used to machine learning giving you kind of a low resolution image, blurred. You kind of can recognize it from afar, but it's
Mm.
not as high resolution as our senses. And then this new technologies just made it super high resolution. Not quite as high fidelity as, real the universe siguro, but it's getting close. And I feel that philosophically for me, and again, apologies if I'm misarticulating this, things like emotion, things like creativity, things like, I don't know, initiative, these are just levels of resolution until at some point darating din dyan yung ML and wala na, no? Everything you thought was human, and maybe humanity itself. Kasi parang there's a parallel discipline called neuroscience, which what
Yeah.
they're doing is they're using these machine learning abstracts, mathematical abstract, and try to go the other way naman. Baka this can tell us more about how our brains work and how our kasi yung ibang, I mean, this is your PhD, 'di ba? Parang there's so much about the human body that's already mathematically predictable, no? Simple things like your heartbeat, your ECG or EEG. Ano na yan, time series na yan of your own body, and you can
Yeah.
apply the same mathematics to it. So anyway, my question to you is, do you agree with that, or do you have a similar take? Na parang for me, it's inevitable. At some point, these mathematics will approximate that the fidelity of human existence. And that's why I'm not too bothered whenever machines start exhibiting human-like traits. Parang for me, wala eh. Parang, I mean, if you regress that far enough, but it might even exceed us, probably it will, no?
It
And
will
it
probably, yeah.
and it will then open new areas of inquiry, the same way kunyari, the James Webb Telescope floating around the solar system is now able to detect new things na previously was unintuitive, no, to physicists, no? Do you have that similar thought or premise, or how would you react to that
Yeah,
thought?
actually, yeah, I mostly agree with you. And when I say mostly, I mean the parts where I probably don't agree, it would be just more of some nuances lang.
Mm,
We probably, I mean, I don't know if we would agree on a timeline when this would happen, because
yeah.
that's not so easy to predict, of course. I mean, I can't even predict that. But I agree for the most part na yeah, things like I mean, because creativity and emotion, like I said, I mean, even understanding our human brain, I mean, uh it's not easy for us to comprehend these things, and we have these concepts.
Mm,
But I mean, okay, going back sa human brain, yung na-mention mo, they actually started using these neural networks to try and model the brain itself. And that's why I said that the technology is actually quite old. And
mm,
they did this back in the 1950s or so with the perceptron and stuff like that. And but they didn't have the hardware to go with it. And it was just like a toy model. Okay, maybe this is how the brain works. I mean, and their models like a linear, parang like a linear regression essentially,
mm,
with some, processing at the end, which we call activation.
mm,
Uh, of course, some, well, if as an aside, if some people are thinking, bakit linear model? Wouldn't it be better if it's non-linear? Well, the good thing with linear models is they can scale up very easily. You
mm,
can scale, because when you're using linear models, it's just really a matrix times a vector. And you can scale it up to 1 billion and walang problems with calculations, calculating that. Computers, can do that easily.
mm,
And most of the things we do naman talaga, even nonlinear applications, we essentially approximate it with a linear function. And that's why those who are, studying mathematics at the college level, when you do calculus, when you take the tangent, you're really just approximating a curve locally,
Yeah.
and that's the tangent. That's your linear function. So everything becomes linear because linear is so easy for us to work with, and they scale easily. Because if you have a nonlinear model, when you scale it up, the parameters, everything, the complexity of it will be exponential compared to um, a linear model. So anyway, going back to that, to the perceptron, maybe it's not quite the way the brain works. We
Yes.
don't know that yet. I mean, they're just trying to essentially make a model that sort of approximates how we think, or maybe it does. I mean, we can't say for sure. And there are these human outputs like emotion. Where does emotion really come from? Where does love come from? Diba? I mean, these are all functions of chemical processes that happen inside our body. They say that what triggers love would be the same as what triggers sensation for chocolate or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
tama.
so and as a mathematician, it would be difficult for me to quantify what these things are because we don't have the algorithm. We just see the output, and yeah, maybe it's traced back to the neurons, to the brain functions, etc. But in terms of how the AI works, that one we can see what's going on because we can see essentially the brain. We've created the brain from scratch using the neural networks, and we can see how it functions. And, we can see these sort of connections going on and how that levels up to something like emotion. Like I said, I've actually heard some AI, more advanced AI or AI depictions of humans. Na, I mean, you can see them on YouTube. Now,
Mhm.
when they talk, they actually seem to have some emotion already,
Exhibit emotions, right? Correct.
exhibit emotion, right? And like I said, it doesn't matter if they have emotion or not, if the computer itself has emotion. But if they exhibit emotion, then the perception is that they have emotion, and that's the important thing. It's, in other words, how we perceive the output. It's creative, maybe hardcore social scientists will say it's not creative, it doesn't have emotion, you
Mhm.
just, it's just exhibiting, it's just faking it, kumbaga. You're faking it. I mean, you can fake emotion, diba? If
Stochastic parrot, sabi nga nila.
if you imagine yourself to be a robot, okay, I am emotionless, I am Guido David, but I'm emotionless, I don't care about anything, but I can train myself to have some emotion by sort of parroting or copying what I see, then eventually I will seem to have emotion. And maybe that's all that's important, the perception that there's emotion or the creativity. Because, like I said, when you're creating new things, essentially you have creativity. Um, yung if you ask a computer to draw a painting, you know, and I'm not up to date on that. I think it's being done already. Yeah, I mean, computer generated painting or image.
Mm.
Maybe it will seem random, but maybe it will look creative. Maybe it would be like yung artwork ni na Picasso or something like that. Looks abstract, but okay, kind of creative. So
Yeah, if I can interrupt here,
yeah,
uh, I'm sure as many people probably experienced, I was one of those kids who was forced to study piano when I was when I was very young. I
okay.
ne I never actually got good at it because I quit midstream. I actually regret quitting. But I got as far as understanding chords, no? Chords.
Mhm.
I'm sure mga gitarista can relate to that. And arpeggios, no? Which is mga chordal progressions.
Ako gitarista ako, so Mike Ligat will and I'll jump in on that after you
Uh,
talk about.
anyway,
Okay.
so the reason why I'm citing this is for musicians. They are artists, they're creatives. But in a way, music gives you a clue of what's going on talaga. And this is me, my opinion lang, with my philosophical threshold. Kuno-kuno. All music we know is just a rearrangement of the same chords. And there are actually some core chordal progressions that
Right.
you can probably attribute to 90% of all music. And ang nagva-vary na lang dyan is perhaps the speed and the key, which is within a finite set, no, of
Right.
what we can hear. So sabi ko, if music works that way, I can bet anything works that way. Even art, and music is an art, even literature. We just haven't found a way that musicians have found for years to express patterns in these practices. Actually, music is highly mathematical if you think about it. Parang alam mo na lahat ng chords eh. Alam mo na lahat ng notes.
Yeah.
And within that finite set, nearly unlimited music can be generated. So hindi lang natin nahuli yung chords for literature until now, no? And I think large language models probably come close na I mean, these models naman are not they don't auto update every day, no? So it's based on pretty much a static representation of everything it's ever read in the past. Pero the way it generates new words, new information, new quote unquote, is based on those chords. No? Think of it as chords. And therefore, and this is me, where probably the creatives, traditionally creatives, and I will have a contention. Anything that we view is creative is actually replicating a pattern that exists somewhere out there. No? You may just be the first to do it, pero then now it becomes part of the literature or the creative parang body of work. So that doesn't mean I will diminish the effort of any artist or any writer. Pero some writers and some artists are quote unquote better than others or more marketable than others. It just means that maybe from a scatter plot you found a more outlier set of set of progressions that few people can replicate. Pero then it becomes semi-mechanical na, no? Kaya nga nakakainis when you see a person who has no painting skill is able to replicate Juan Luna would have been a Juan Luna work pero with a different subject matter because apparently pala the colors and the composition of a Juan Luna or a Fernando Amorsolo is a matter of chords lang pala. It's a matter of patterns. So I'll stop there kasi medyo weird na yan eh. Pero how do you feel about that or you have a similar take on music for
W-
example?
Yeah, I mean, before I get to the music, I'll give you one example that's, something that's creative and it's art, but let's take a movie storyline.
Yeah,
I mean,
formulaic.
what yeah, when have you seen recently a storyline na, wow, this is so new.
Unique one,
I
no?
mean, parang you've probably seen, the basic storyline concept has probably been done, I mean, and most movies will probably use that same formula, maybe 90%, I don't know.
They call it the
I
hero's journey na nga eh. Somebody
Yeah,
wrote it na eh, di ba? So that's a
right.
formula. Oo.
Yeah, it is a formula. So parang that's art, but you can't really, I mean, there's a limit to the creativity there in making a movie. Maybe you can tinker with some of the stuff. I mean, I think see Christopher Nolan did that before, like yung Memento, or was that
He
the
did it
title
in
of the movie?
reverse.
Yeah, he
Memento.
just did it in reverse to make it
Oo.
more compelling, and you can make it more compelling. So maybe that's part of the art. Make it more suspenseful, or if you have a twist sa ending, make it more shocking. And yeah, sometimes I still see movies that shock me. Maybe a little out of name drop ko lang, for example, the movie Parasite, that was very interesting, and I didn't anticipate how it would end up. Maybe I could have if I picked up on clues or something. But most movies are essentially formulaic. You have a love story formula, you have an action like a revenge type formula or something like that. And but it's crucial to movies because like they say, you can't write a story without the conflict. So the conflict is at the base of that, and there's only a finite number of conflicts that you could
You can
think of
dream up.
yeah,
Actually,
so,
if I can react agad, no, and before you talk about guitars and music, um, that's also kind of partly the insight I got when these large language models came out. Because obviously I've been invited to make talks in
of
various
course.
fora. And then I can now neatly group mga disciplines and industries, obviously anecdotally. Pero there are
Mhm.
disciplines that are highly reactive and negative about AI. And then there are ones na, okay, so what's the big deal? Anyway, so, well, firstly, the pattern I'm starting to notice is any field that has a high degree of credentialism. So you need certain, I don't know, titles and achievements to be in that field. Usually professions, no?
Mm,
Academics is one. And versus fields who are less credential driven, more achievement driven, output driven, no? And I'm not saying just because you're an academic, you belong one or the other. Maybe it's more of a
right.
personality quirk. So many people I meet who are highly credential driven, they hate AI like the plague. And then the ones naman who are whether you have your PhD or not, just produce this output. They love AI naman, and I've been trying to unpack it. Kasi who knows? Maybe this is a paper I should help write eventually.
Maybe.
Um, one of the things I noticed is the creative process seems to be the crucial or one of the crucial elements. Kasi if you define creativity as original thought, then you would be a critic of AI. Kasi, well, it's not original, these are just patterns. In fact, you're stealing patterns from other artists, mga ganyan, di ba? Whereas if for you, the creative process is more about consistency and execution, basically craft, you make no claims. Now, what I'm doing is probably not original, but I can do it very well. So that's the definition of competence and creativity for you. And AI is such a tool, no? That's automatically competent, automatically, kumbaga sa grammar, 100% grammar is correct,
Mhm.
usually. That's a big help for you as someone who wants to execute output. And then maybe you take on the originality. So I'm just the one prompt. Parang sa music, no? There are musicians who need to learn muna how to manipulate a keyboard or a musical instrument so that it doesn't sound hard on the ears. But then creating the piece or creating the song or coming up with kind of the progressions, that's where your flair and originality comes from. And I feel that AI is just that. Parang sa photography, a camera is just that. The camera suddenly takes realistic, accurate photos from the get-go, whereas in the past you needed a Rembrandt or these great
Right.
artists to be able to reproduce it, no? And nakaposing yung mga tao for hours to approximate that. Ngayon ito, isang click pack, you got it. And that's why it took 100 years at least for photography to be accepted as an art. Hindi matanggap ng mga tao na hello, Rembrandt had to make me pose for months or years before he got his paintings right. And kaya sabi ko, anachronistically, if you've seen a Rembrandt, I had the privilege of seeing one in Spain a long time ago. It's a photographic painting, no? Long before photography existed. I think he was like 1500s or something. Wala pang mga photographs. And then suddenly you now have these boxes that give you lalo na no nagka-color na dati black and white Rembrandt-like images from a press of a button. I feel it's the same thing. Eh. I don't know. So anyway, I'll stop here. What's your take on that, or do you have a similar?
But yeah, but aren't isn't photography more of output driven? I mean, I'm just trying to, think in
Yes,
terms of what
uh,
you said. So,
parang
but
parang
they took a longer time to, I
no,
mean,
the art community took forever
ah,
to accept
okay,
photography
I
as
see.
one of their own. Actually, ang naging
Okay.
irony diyan, one of the most contentious debates, the portraiture artists kasi sila yung nawawalan ng trabaho.
Hmm.
Until later, much, much later. In fact, today, if you wanted to have a portrait of yourself done, you give the portraiture artist a photo. And then the artist will now have unlimited time to replicate your photo by hand
Right.
or a sketch kasi may picture na. Dati, posing ka dyan, no? And that came way after okay, pwede palang mag-intersect itong dalawang arts na to. Photography gives you the base and the portraiture artist adds the flair. Ngayon, both of them are probably gonna get smashed because the AI artist will say, okay, here's the photo and here's the sample of the style. Pablo Picasso's painting. Okay, AI, mix the two. Give me a blend, which is actually
Yeah,
a command, no, in AI.
right.
And then boom, you have a Picasso version of
Boom.
your
Yeah,
photograph. Style
yeah,
transfer.
instant. Right.
Oh. So anyway, sorry, you were gonna react.
Right. And well, I mean, I will add another dimension to that. Now you say, it's credential based and output based. Those who usually are more, uh, are slower to accept new technology are, as you said, those who are essentially threatened by this new technology. So that's one part of it. And I could imagine, we have a lot of BPOs. You know, they might not be so keen on the technology because you can have chatbots and even virtual assistants essentially replacing these jobs. So this photography na sinabi mo, I mean, those, as you mentioned, those who are threatened, na they will lose their jobs, they were probably slower to,
To
you know,
accept.
to accept the paradigm shift. Uh, I'm an academic, but I'm accepting the shift because, of course, I mean, I'm doing work on AI. So, you either, sabi mo, love or hate. You either embrace it or, resist it as long as you're able to until the point na, the world has accepted it and ikaw na lang hindi. And then, then you just have to, accept it. So, that's kind of way we, at least for me, we adapt to new technology, to something that's different. Um, AI will become part of lives of different professionals.
Mm.
Hindi lang naman yung BPO, maybe even lawyers, doctors, maybe will depend a lot more on AI in the future. And of course, once nagkakaroon ng shift into the younger generations will be eating the new technology because fam- they'll be getting familiar with that first. Unlike the older generation who became maybe familiar with the older technology and are resisting to adapt to the newer technology. So
One contentious field, which we're both partly a part of, is software development. We write code, and I have no skin in the game in that fight naman eh. Hindi naman ako nag-comsci or anything, but
yeah,
I I feel it's already a
we
done deal because what is a good coder? A good coder is a consistent one, error-free, bug-free.
right.
And syempre, I did not get formally trained in software development. Kind of learn it on the job. And in fact, in the developer circles, that's actually kind of a divide, no? Self-taught developer versus formally trained developer. But the contention is, how can we be in a way, how can we be so defensive about a practice which is all about consistency and patterns, 'di ba? And now that we have a tool like a large language model, which will treat your programming code the same way as any other language. So if it can do translation from English to Spanish, this thing can do translations between processes to Python or processes to C++. Eh, di ba gano'n naman talaga yon? And syempre, ako, I find that the software developer circles are kind of split. Some will say, yeah, but still need a human to check the bugs. And can you see how spaghetti the code of ChatGPT is? And for me, yeah, it's spaghetti, but it works. And it's the
Right.
same way that was actually a debate between developers versus developers. Some developers are all about, form and, basically clean code. Yeah, there's even a book called Clean Code that I remember reading. Samantalang yung iba, yeah, clean, but clean is secondary to functional. You can be as clean as you want. The whole thing doesn't work, or it takes you forever to write it. That's less useful. And then suddenly in comes a large language model, which writes semi-clean code because it's seen every other code in existence in GitHub siguro.
Yeah.
And it can check your code. Yung pa yung nakakatawa kasi it'll read your code and can even annotate it, or it can even say, hey, look, this is not really an efficient way of coding it. This is
Right.
another way of doing it. Suddenly, poof, parang music. Everything is a chord. Everything is a chord or
Right.
progression na lang.
Yeah, and I have no skin in the game either. I'm not a programmer by training. I'm more of a theoretical guy. And like I said, s- there will be purists and there will be those who will be quicker to adapt to the new technology. The purists are usually, well, they're probably medyo purists because they're I hate to offend anyone, but medyo a bit snobbish about their trade now
Yep.
because okay, whatever the machine does, it won't be as good brain as the human because of this or that. But the way for me, the way to approach it is to recognize this technology and no, I mean work with it. Um, it could be better than you, but you still have to work with it. I mean, in the same way, kunya sa BPO, not all BPOs naman will be replaced by AI, at least not in the near future. Maybe in the far more distant future, they will be. But in the near future, they will still need BPOs who can, call center agents who can handle the more technical stuff, of course.
Yeah.
But the more mundane stuff and getting information from a someone who calls in, that can definitely be done by AI. And that's been the way of technology naman eh. Yeah, some of the um, more mundane tasks can be automated and thereby making it more efficient. Ganun din naman dati sa farming, the more mundane tasks, yung mag-aararo ka, you don't need to do it by
By hand.
hand with
Yeah.
a carabao. You can use a tractor and then make it more efficient. But you can say you can be a purist and say, okay, the Carabao's better, but I mean, the tractor is more efficient. Some music naman, well, and that's why I gave the example of the films before, because in the film industry, parang it's very clear that you only have a very small finite number of storylines that you could come up. You could twinker, make it, the sauce will just look different, how you coat it, but the core of it is the same. Ganun din sa music, especially pop music. Most of the chord progressions are similar. And sa music kasi, I teach mathematics of music, so I just want to get this in. When you have a string, kasi it starts with essentially started with a string, kunyari, a steel string, and you tie it with a certain tension so that it's tight, and then it will make a vibration. In theory, there's an infinite number of points you could fret the string. I mean, kumaga, when you're fretting it, you're parang reducing the length of it so that it will create a different tone. Or it's like you're reducing the length of the string. So a longer string, a shorter string will have a higher pitch and or a higher note, and the longer string will have a lower one. So when you
Mm.
fret it, when you essentially cut the string, then the pitch becomes higher and higher. But the reason we have the limitations, you don't have an infinite number of notes, is because it's designed to be attractive to our ears, and for our ears,
It's a
uh,
limited, it's a
it's
limited
it's
range.
the limit is pag sintonado siya, it's not good.
Uh-uh.
Okay.
Mm.
Maybe in the future, maybe that will change. Okay lang sintonado. But it doesn't sound good to our ears when we hear something sintonado. And the reason it's sintonado, or if it's in tune,
Mhm.
is actually yung string, if you imagine a string, and if you cut it or fret it as middle, if you reduce it by one half, it's still in tune. That's actually one octave higher. If you divide it by three parts, it's still in tune. Because if you follow the wave, it will start and end at the same point because it's just one third and or one fourth or one fifth, etc.
Mm.
But so everything there is just really, a fraction of the whole string. So that's the mathematics part, and that's why the chords, you just have a finite number of chords, and the patterns that make sense with those chords is also limited, and and that's why you said you can pigeonhole it into most pop music. Maybe if you get into something like jazz na medyo free form, then maybe you could get more combinations out of that.
More
But
combinations of essentially the same raw material, no? Parang
yeah,
gano'n.
yeah, well, same raw material, but you can maybe have different patterns, different
Oo.
timings, maybe out of imperfect timings, or not the standard 4/4. I'm not classically trained musician, and when I was younger, I just trained myself to play the guitar. When I was younger, I would hear about some people sa conservatory sa UP College of Music na ano, parang, oh, these guys who learn from ano, yung natuto sa kalye,
Hmm,
learn by themselves. They're not real musicians. So I heard that. I was a bit offended because what's a real musician? I mean, because you can read notes,
credential. That's a
yeah,
credentialism.
yeah, yun nga, diba? So parang that's why I referred to that example para to refer to sort of related to what we're talking about. So parang credentialism. So parang okay, they're saying, okay, I'm a real musician. I studied conservatory, ganun, ganun. But wait, I can play, and I mean, kung hindi ka naman sintonado, your timing is okay. Then I think anyone who makes music should be called a musician.
Hmm,
Anyone who writes should be called a writer. And even if it's an AI who writes, that's a writer there, because it's not just putting words and patterns that it has seen, but it's doing something that it has not encountered before. Now you're getting into new creations and creativity,
new territory.
new territory. So ako, I have no skin in the game. I'm embracing AI as much as I can, as much as it allows me
Actually,
to.
you've just reinforced the music analogy further for me, no? Kasi you're correct. You can generate pretty much any sound you want. But there's a limited range of what we would accept as good sound. And the
Right.
rest is noise.
The rest is noise.
For me, that's akin to the ethical debates, no? You can ask ChatGPT or you can use it for anything you want. But there is a certain limited range of what we would accept as or what we would call acceptable use. Beyond that, we're now worried about safety, we're now worried about ethics. Kasi na-produce din yung work pero it's plagiarized, or na-produce din yung work but it suggests, I don't know, harm on other people. In fact, the first not years, first few months of ChatGPT was pretty wild, no? You could ask it to
Yeah.
write a code to hack a website. You could ask it to, write libelous content about people. And then ngayon nakaka-guardrails na. Oh, bawal yan, bawal yan, bawal yan. In fact, I find that disturbing, but for a completely different reason. Na that means there's human intervention saying ito pwede, ito hindi. So who are we to say to limit that, no? Pero syempre, you can be extremely liberal about it or extremely rigid about it. Um, we're about to cross into the 1 hour mark now. Out of curiosity. So maybe we can extend a little bit because we haven't even talked about your
Sure.
COVID work.
Yeah.
So let's segue to that. So I remember it was 2020, and even I had a small bit to play in that parang mainstream discussion because I remember data ethics PH when we formed. We got into online meetups rather quickly because of the lockdown. Our first online meetup, first two actually, was all about these pandemic modeling. And obviously it was a relatively new thing for the public. People didn't realize the mga SEIR blah 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 parang calculations existed na pala. But the most important thing was, in a way, the social and the political implications of it, because some at that time some forecasts were saying, oh, it's gonna go at 100,000, it's gonna go to 1 million. Actually, at the end of the day, everyone's projection at that time was very short of the real number because we went into the millions rather quickly within the year, and then later it tapered off. So from a race to predict how much, then later it became how long it became,
Right.
and again, limited data eh. And syempre as a person who does data, I kind of intuitively knew that all forecasts would be wrong. Kasi nga you had very little information at the start. Eventually, it kind of, sorted out. And the danger of operating on limited assumptions. But anyway, that's not the question I wanted to ask. So I wanted to get back to you. How did you guys, or you specifically, get started on this parang public service? Ngayon, you're probably the only one left publicly tweeting about the positivity rates and all that. But at that time, parang it was a free for all, no? So could you run us through that and your insights from that, no, in retrospect?
Yeah, it was a free for all. And originally, yun nga, the pandemic started, and I heard about groups being formed, and there may mga groups from certain universities or colleges or institutions, because nobody knew what was going on. Basically, even the doctors, gulo-gulo nila. I mean, nobody, nobody. I mean, they didn't have a treatment for it. Everybody was panicking, and even the government was not prepared
Mm,
for it. So they found what they thought at that time was the best solution was a lockdown. But I mean, essentially, the solutions that people were coming up with, a part of it was they were just looking at what other countries were doing.
yeah.
Like lockdown said, the country maybe maybe we should do the same because we're seeing this number of cases or this number of deaths in hospitals. And actually, one batchmate of mine in high school actually was one of the first casualties, maybe
Oh,
one of
sorry,
the
sorry to
first.
hear.
Yeah, I mean, kilala rin siya ni Mike Ligot.
Mm,
One of the first maybe 100 cases back in um, March or April of 2020.
mm,
And at that time, I was like any other person. I'm not yet known by the public. So I was just, I was just in lockdown. And yun nga, they formed a group. There was this group sa UP, formed by Dr. Mahar Lagmay, who's you might be familiar
yes.
with the Project Noah. And he was, you could say, he was the most um, publicly known scientist at that time because of his work with Project Noah. And I heard him being interviewed on radio, etc. But of course, he was not a modeler, and I mean, he was a geologist. So he is a geologist, so nothing wrong with that. But he had this group, kasama din si Dr. Ted Herbosa. So it's the UP COVID-19 pandemic response team. So they formed this group, and they initially invited me to be part of that. But for some reason, didn't get moving, so I didn't get to be part of it. It was a big group, so
Mm,
marami silang modelers in that group. And I was in lockdown, and not really doing anything, enjoying my break from doing work. Uh, and then I was looking at the models that were produced at that time, and sabi mga they were all medyo far off. That was back in March and
yeah.
April, and I thought, well, I did teach about mathematical biology and these SIR models, SEIR models I'm familiar with, so I decided to as as a sort of for myself, just for myself, because I was not believing the models. I was seeing projections of millions of cases already, or maybe 300,000. So from April 2020, they were projecting 300,000 cases by May,
Mm,
and there were different competing models, but most of them were in that range, or some of them were under predicting. Now some one model was saying, okay, well, this will die out, and the pandemic's over after 1 month, and yay. So and after years of experience as a mathematician, you sort of have an eye for a model, like even just looking at the model, just the output, parang doesn't seem feasible. So I wrote, or I did my own calculations, and I don't know, I'm gonna make some brags here, so pardon me for
yeah, for
some
sure. Go for
not
it.
so hidden brags. At that time, because we're talking about a concept that people are familiar with is the reproduction number. So it's the
The R.
essentially the
Yeah, the
R,
famous
right?
R. Yeah.
Right. And it's well known for mathematical modelers to use R or R naught, and they use an R naught for every disease. They calculate it based on historical data. So people estimated what the R is for COVID, and they used maybe the R of flu because there's no data yet. It's just new, and they used the R of SARS. Um, but if you do that, then the assumption is that everyone, because when you use the R of canary flu, when there's a flu outbreak, everyone will just get flu until there's enough natural immunity. Now there will be herd immunity, and then the
Mm,
cases will decrease. So it looks like I said, a sigmoidal function. So
yeah.
everyone will get infected until people stop getting infected because there's enough natural immunity built. Um, and that's the basis of most of the models. There's a fixed R, they calculate all that. And but for that to happen, I mean, your cases will run in the millions because everyone will get will get the virus. But I thought, well, that can't be right. Because when you say that you're letting it run naturally and your R is canary, your R is 2, each person is infecting 2 other people, but that assumes that there were no interventions.
Mm,
Kailan nagkaroon ng lockdown and people were, doing social distancing. So that's an intervention. And it won't be the case anymore na one person will infect 2 others because they're in lockdown. So
yeah.
I thought that maybe the R can be modified. It's a time varying reproduction number. And in fact, I mean, I was searching for literature. I was doing my research, trying to find some time varying reproduction. I didn't find any. Maybe I'm not a good researcher or I didn't
Yeah.
do enough
There were more
research.
recent ones that came out during the pandemic na yata.
Right. During the
RT.
pandemic, meron na. But actually, I was the first. So I thought there was no literature, but maybe I'll try it. So I was actually the first one to. I mean, I can't say for sure that I'm the first, but maybe I
One of
was
the
one of the
few.
first.
One of the
Yeah,
first.
because
Yeah.
I wrote my first projection in April, but it was not widely circulated because it was just me and my friend. So who are we? We're just nobody. I was not associated with any institution. I mean, yeah, I'm from UP, but there was already a UP team, so I'm just some guy, some professor. Okay, so and with the time varying reproduction number, I was able to produce a projection that was actually within 10%
Yeah.
of the of what it eventually was, maybe 10 to 15%. That's not so bad. I mean, compared kasi from April to May, I think there were about 12,000 cases by May,
Yeah.
and May 8th. But there are other projections were predicting mga 100,000 or 200,000 cases. But mine was, fairly close to 12,000, so maybe not 15,000.
Uh-huh.
Through channels, some government people got a hold of that, and they actually, I mean, I talked to one general. I mean, and he called me during this time. Na hindi pa ako nasa news nun, and he said he looked at the projections and he said this seems realistic compared to what I was seeing. So we started sending our own
Updates.
reports, yeah,
Hmm. Pero
updates.
hindi publicly, just to
Hindi
them.
publicly, yeah.
Uh,
We published it sa UP website, but it was not really generating enough. But we were sending it directly to Malacanang. And I don't know if they were using it, but I think presumably they were getting it, maybe comparing it with others, because there were official teams already doing the projections. And but some media people started to, take notice, I think. And I started getting interviews in some smaller networks,
yeah.
nothing major, but we were publishing this. And but then something happened, and by June, I had the projection became parang what the actual number of cases was fairly close, and then some person kinalat sa social media. Hey,
And
this
that was
guy
the
said
start. That was the
that was
start.
the start of it. Hey, this person said this will be the number of cases, and look, it's kasi I was amused that I was reading about it because I never got any attention from that or for recognition. But I was reading it, and some people were saying, "Oh, ano to? This is like parang ano bang tawag doon sa manghuhula na yun? Si Madame Oring or something na parang
Some
na
number out
na
of the
right because for people who don't really siguro ano have a deep understanding of mathematics, it may seem like like parang witchcraft or something, but it's really just a mechanistic model. And even the government noticed, and that's why we go back parang noon July of 2020. There was
mm.
this one time na sinabi ni Harry Roque, okay, this is the number of cases, 37,000. Ang prediction ng UP, we were still quoted as UP there. Ang prediction ng UP is 40,000. So tinalo natin ang UP, yay! And so that was a meme. No offense to former speaker Harry Roque. It's actually,
Yeah, I remember that.
knowing
That
personally.
was kind of a funny part, no. Actually, if I can share also, and I'm just being conscious that we're almost out of time. There were a lot of modeling happening behind the scenes. Siyempre, parang everyone would put it on a leaderboard. This is what
Right,
AIM said. This is I
right.
remember meron pa ngang ano eh.
May UP, may
Uh,
LaSalle,
and
may
there were two
Ateneo, of
UP
course.
forecasts. There were two UP forecasts for
Well,
some
one
reason.
was one was kami.
Isa-isa inyo.
Yeah,
And then for me, I remember I was talking to a global group, no. There was a group called the Corona Tracker. We're one of the first international groups, mostly volunteers. It was not organized at all. It started in Malaysia, and then I was one of the Philippines, volunteers. And we were thinking, syempre, eventually we had the epidemiologists come in, the mathematical biologists come in. But at the start, we were just saying, hey, look, if you track the progression of a disease, and it looks like this one is rather fast, no? After a certain amount of time, people are either dead or recovering. So it's kind of like the SIR without calling it the SIR.
right. Yeah,
And and sabi ko, I remember this was a contentious debate. Internally ito, no one knew about this. Sabi ko, look, you can use the deaths as a proxy because eventually for someone to die, because knowing that there is no antidote to the disease, they would have gone through technically that life cycle of a disease. So the number of deaths are indicative of a broader base of cases. Now the question is, how do you estimate that? No, and we were coming up with all sorts of numbers, which actually eventually ended up being rather conservative. Kasi ang alam lang naman natin at that time, if I remember, was the China number. Eh. Sila lang naman yung
right.
nagpa-publish, di ba? You were saying, hey,
Right.
look, there were 305 deaths in China and they're reporting 14,000 cases. I remember these
But
numbers
that
by
was
heart.
also a bit dangerous because they are known to sort of
Twist it.
withhold
Oh, yeah.
withhold some
And
data. So
yeah. So sabi ko, hindi, may range yan, syempre,
yeah,
of
yeah, may
whatever,
range.
no? Veracity. So sabi ko, and suddenly may dalawang namatay sa Philippines. Kasi for the longest time, DOH didn't wanna admit na the two
There was a
deaths
problem, right? Yeah,
were actually even COVID. They just died. They're foreigners. They had the flu. They died. Sabi ko, okay, let's make an analysis using some binomial probabilities. So, yun lang naman yung meron tayo at that time. For two people to have died, how many should have been sick? Parang ganun lang yung,
right.
yung argument. And if we use China as a proxy, and then exactly what you said, let's say they're sandbagging. Maybe the cases are at least twice double what they should be. Then that means for two people to have died in the Philippines, there have to be at least 400 or 500 or even 1,000 that are walking around sick. Syempre, when I said that in a Zoom call, they were saying, "Ah, that's alarmist. You're
Yeah,
gonna get pummeled publicly, And then 1 month later, yan na, naglabasan na yung mga numero nyo. Buto mo, talo pa nga yung
ano
numero ko
pa?
eh. These
Yeah,
guys are
parang
saying 10,000 na and all that. And
right,
look,
it was conservative pa nga eh, when suddenly nag-exploding number of cases and people were shocked kasi I mean, people thought no problem to, parang like SARS, it's not gonna come in the country and then suddenly bigla nag-explode na. I mean, people were actually shocked na nag-lockdown because we weren't seeing it
yeah.
on the ground, but they were seeing it na pala in the hospitals eh. So, yeah,
And ano nga this is more post-mortem, obviously. One data set leading up to COVID, the lockdown that we monitored closely was dengue because one of the projects we did with NASA was a dengue detector. And one thing we found odd, and this is a subject of an ongoing discussion I have with some people is the number of dengue cases fell during COVID for many reasons, probably.
Yeah.
People were trapped in their houses. Pero ako sabi ko, knowing human nature, malamang a lot of the dengue was reported as COVID. Kasi if you superimpose the COVID graph on the dengue graph, kung saan nawala yung dengue, maraming COVID. And that was there was an intern in our group at that time who used that as a base case, no? Okay, if we know the seasonality of dengue, which is fairly predictable, and now we have a COVID, how much kaya of that number would have been the dengue? And up
Yeah.
to now, it's something that it's kind of an open question. Kasi it was a global phenomena. Dengue dropped to near zero numbers during the COVID. But the symptoms are very similar. Fever, flu-like symptoms. And yun din, this is where the politics of public health comes in. If all your hospitals are wired up to look for COVID, they will probably find COVID anywhere they look.
Probably.
And the numbers in a way suggest it. Of course, I'm probably not going to be submitting that in any journal soon. Pero anyway, the reason why I brought that up is syempre when you started publishing Okta, for example, started publishing its numbers, it became quite political very quickly. And people, I remember people were calling out everyone. Pero in the kind of the middle to the latter part, kayo na yung nagiging target. So how did you navigate that? I was even a witness during that infamous congressional hearing, no, online.
You
Uh,
were there. Did you?
Oo, and,
Uh,
anyway, I'll reserve my opinions about how I really felt about that hearing. Pero ikaw, I wanted to hear from you. How did you navigate that, and did you learn what were insights you learned from that experience?
well, it was tough kasi ano things were getting political. Things were getting heated. There were people who obviously opposed lockdowns. And to be fair, hindi naman kami, I mean, I think we became known as itong mga nagpapa-lockdown. I mean, we really just recommended lockdown once nung ano lang, nung Delta wave. I mean,
Correct.
after that, maybe we recommended having some protocols, ganon. But the lockdown we really recommended it only once, and it was a challenge for the entire country. Like I said, at the start, people didn't know what to do. Everybody was nangangapa,
Yeah.
and they were bringing in experts. And you could have interviewed me that time. I would have been happy to to talk in your podcast. I don't know
Yeah.
if you reached out to me. Of course, wala pa akong Twitter nun. And so at that time, yun nga, so kami, we just wanted to help,
Yeah.
using whatever we can do to help. I never got paid for my public service, and
Yeah.
that's okay. I mean,
That
I
wasn't the
didn't.
goal, naman,
That
'di ba?
wasn't the goal. I didn't ask to get paid. I mean, you did volunteer work like everyone else. So, and of course, initially, parang I was a bit, let's say, hurt that by using science to try to help the public, it was actually being rejected by some part of the public. Maybe not all, but some part of it,
So there
and
was a division, a very painful division
a
at that
very
time.
painful division. And I can understand. I mean, part of the division was, of course, there were business people who wanted the economy open for economic reasons. And parang nga yung division, parang, some people reference yung movie na Don't Look Up or something. I
Yeah.
don't
Oh,
know.
I love that
You see
movie.
that?
I
Yeah, I
love that
love
movie.
that movie too. I mean, because,
You
it,
lived
it,
it.
it-
You
right, I
lived that
lived it.
movie
It shows the interplay of science and
in
politics.
politics.
Because in science, we're taught na, there is right and there is wrong,
Yeah.
right? And I'm just talking based on data, and this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing projections of these cases, and my projections were not that far off. I mean, more or less, maybe it's not
There's an error
super.
margin,
There's
pero
an error margin, right? Yeah, it's
you
within
can't
that.
be crucified for being within an
Like,
error margin.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's no, nobody has that crystal ball that they can, but it's within the, and we generally predict if it's going up at least, or if it's going down. And that's the important part of it, not the actual numbers. Is it increasing? Is it becoming more of a threat, or is it getting more safe now, ganun. And that's what people know naman, beyond the numbers. But at the same time, parang, from my perspective, I'm just telling the truth. And then from other people's perspective, parang it became political. It
Mm.
became political on so many levels na, okay, pag sinabi kong, oh, tumatas dito sa area na to. Oh, suddenly whoever's the local official of that area gets
Why are
crucified.
you ganging up on us? Why are you painting us in a bad
Parang
light?
ganun, parang they get ano, they get
But
affected by it.
you know,
Parang
there were two shocking moments, no? One involving you and the other one involving your colleague, no? Si Father Austriaco, of Octa. And sorry if this is opening old wounds, no, but I just want to highlight it for the benefit of people who may not have been watching at that time. Yung sayo was during the congressional hearing. I remember this was a moment where basically you were being grilled on your model. Pero a certain congressperson who was grilling you was arguing from a completely different angle. I don't know if you remember this. Parang sino-challenge niya yung SEIR mo pero yung line of reasoning niya was more like an econometric or regression
yeah,
model. And I said,
yeah.
oh my God, why is this even
Eh,
being broadcast publicly? This is such a painful thing to watch, no?
It's such a painful thing to experience and to watch. I'm sure I haven't watched it in retrospect, pero
Sorry, I
parang,
mean, I was being
but
empathic. Sabi ko, kawawa naman si Prof. Guido. And then the other one, and then give me your comments on both. Si Father Austriaco naman, where he made, at that time, a rather bold claim. And I don't recall already anymore the details. Basta, he saw, or at least he started announcing what was already, a decline in cases. And parang something along the lines of immunity, parang something like that.
yeah, we
Pero
achieved some kind of herd immunity,
herd
or
immunity. And everyone thought of that
the
as a
pandemic is over.
yeah,
He
yeah, yeah.
essentially said
He
that.
was
Yeah,
the first or one of the
he
first,
was the
no?
first one
Oh,
who said that.
and I remember that distinctly because I was like watching this. Syempre, I don't know any better. I'm not a virologist. Pero sabi ko, there's so many elements of what he said actually make sense. Even just looking at the math of it. See, at that time I had been religiously following all the numbers. And he said, I think that's it. And no one else wanted to second it. Siguro napaso na sa politics.
Yeah,
Until
me,
much
that
later.
includes me, na napaso sa
Oo.
politics.
So when you look back in hindsight, he was dead spot on, no? He was dead on, no? If
He was
you superimpose his announcement with the graph of
right.
COVID, he got it. Sabi ko, man. Anyway, sige. What I wanted to hear from you was anyway, yun. How was that episode? Painful episodes, and then your reflex on it. And then in hindsight, having gone through that, have you approached I guess the art of forecasting and politics slightly differently, or it hasn't
Well,
changed?
in fairness to the congressional hearings, so
Yeah,
yeah, maybe the process was painful, but I think it was maybe necessary din
necessary.
pala,
Mm.
right? Because even the Congress, they're not used to having this,
Debating numbers, of
debating
course
numbers,
not.
or they're not used to ano, parang, I mean, I think in a way they felt na, who's this guy, this nobody,
Mm.
and he holds so much power. And I'm not saying that na as a brag, because
That was the reality of it. People were
the
listening to.
reality was, when we say something, parang it influences, policies and the direction. And and who's this guy? Who's controlling this guy? I think and that's the politics of it. There must be someone behind this guy, or someone, someone, because that's the nature of politics. When somebody talks, usually, if you have all the influencers, there's usually someone behind an influencer, a troll, some people behind trolls, or something like that. But there was no, the truth of it was, I was just talking as a scientist. And what I got from that was, well, of course, we have the freedom of expression, and freedom. We should have the freedom to use science, but of course, we should use it responsibly. So that's my take on that. I mean, we should be, and I am, when I am being interviewed now, although rarely, I should be also careful with the choice of words. And sometimes, using the wrong word can
Make it a
lead to,
difference, you know? Yeah.
right, it can make a big difference. So kaya ngayon, mas mas my choice of words is very I mean, I can understand now why athletes talk that way when they talk post a sports interview. They talk like a robot. Parang pare-pareho yung sinabi. Oh yeah, we weren't at that level today.
We tried our best,
We
gave it
tried our
our
best.
all, mga ganyan.
Right. Basically got nothing politically incorrect, So because that's the language that's needed
Yeah.
for being a public speaker, and athletes are public speakers also, and I was a public speaker, so I have to in a way calibrate my language now. Okay, I can talk about the numbers, and I think in the Congress they agreed naman there's nothing wrong if I share an output, because that's really my findings and that's
Mhm.
my own findings, and nobody can contend with that. I mean, they can look at the model and dissect it and stuff like that, but in the end it's really my model versus another
Everyone else.
person's model, right?
Oh.
And yung kay Father Austriaco, you're right. I mean, although to be fair, we were also talking internally as a
Mhm.
group. We did see that, but nobody really wanted to say it. And I was surprised when he actually said it. I can say it now in public because
Mhm.
I was surprised when he actually said it in public, because by that time I was, like you said, medyo nasunog na ako. So
Being
I needed
measured.
to very measured na yung mga ano. I mean, you could say it's decreasing, but to declare that it's the end of the pandemic, it's actually I mean, a very bold
Statement.
claim.
Yeah.
Uh, but we were already internally parang thinking that, kasi we had enough vaccinations,
Yeah.
and the virus had mutated into something milder like yung Omicron. So it was actually I think nothing wrong siguro with saying it, except maybe the choice of the words I think was very
Yeah.
bold,
I
and that
remember
was
the
it
the
was a bit
criticism. The criticism was political. Parang
yeah,
lumalabas.
right,
It may be interpreted as an excuse to relax health protocols.
right,
But even that particular point, protocols cost money, no? Protocols
right,
cost in terms of effort, even wearing a mask. So there's a social cost.
yeah,
So it cannot be absolute, no? Syempre, in hindsight, that was hard to appreciate at that time. Parang, what? You're gonna sanction people going around again and putting their lives in danger. But yeah, but while you're not doing that, it's costing you, it's costing the economy. And then now we've swung full reverse. Parang, oh
yeah,
sige, back to traffic, back
right,
to socialization. Anyway, no, the point I wanted to make, and by the way, let's save some for the next episode
yeah,
because
sure.
uh this is really interesting. You mentioned a very good point about the choice of words. In a way, it harkens back to the first part of our chat. It's all about language, and now we have models that basically create language, and it's pissing off some people and exciting others. So again, babalik ako dun sa, in a way, that weird conceptual framework I have, that the effect of language goes beyond the intrinsic mathematics of it. It's just a word, pero the impact on people can be political, can be emotional. And then I go back and say, maybe that attribute, the politicalness or emotionality of it, is just another feature of language that eventually will be subject to some model. That's scary in a way because can you imagine models that are so persuasive? You can manipulate people. No, you can drive opinion. In effect, that's happening already via social media, which is kind of an algorithm driven environment, and it's moving people towards fake news, towards polarization. Uh, so the kind of the last question I want to ask you before we wrap up is, does that how do you react to that as a mathematician or as a practitioner of mathematics and data, that
Well,
that
yeah,
moral responsibility of it?
yeah, and that's something that we will continue to debate. I mean, and I mean, it won't stop next year or ano. It's a continuous struggle. Even it goes back to parang freedom of expression. You're allowed to have certain liberties, but not completely all the liberties.
100%.
I mean,
Yeah.
right? Because and that's related to what I was talking about. Being a public speaker, and ganun din sa when you post, of course, there are some things na bawal, like you can post obscenities, racial stuff. So there's already a limitation to what we can post, except siguro in some forums where you can, say whatever you want or amongst friends. Um, so there's always this balance that we have to contend with, and the line between that balance can be moving. Pero the balance is what liberties we're allowed to have and what liberties we're not supposed to have as far as expressing. And you mentioned kanina na parang people will decide on this balance, but that's the way it has been throughout history. We've had to basically police ourselves and what's allowed and what's not allowed, and that's why we have laws. It started with the 10 commandments maybe, but it's progressed into this sophisticated set of laws, and that's still no, I mean, we're seeing that now. I mean, we're seeing some media people get attacked for
Mm-hmm.
saying certain things. Yeah, some networks getting attacked. So, are they allowed to say certain things or not allowed, and what are the repercussions? And ultimately, I mean, tayo alone, we can't decide on this. This will be decided by maybe even not us, but hopefully at least with our input
Yeah.
when they start to do some regulations on what may be allowed, or on the ethics side of it, what may be you know possible or
Acceptable.
allowed, acceptable,
Yeah.
and what's not acceptable. And I think that's why we have a role to play in this, Tayo, especially you. You're a communicator for AI. Th- we can try to negotiate these lines that will swing in a certain way, and some people will try to make it move towards a certain direction, make it maybe more restrictive. Some will make it less restrictive, but we have to find a balance. And laws are ano naman eh, they're designed to be they're supposed to be sensible.
Yeah.
But laws are sensible, and that's the way of arguing where the line will be. The balance of something that's sensible and but not you know you know offending people or something like that, not crossing into really darker territory. So and that's why your podcast is very useful to deliver that. We have to educate more people about AI, so that the person who is not into AI as much as us, the common person, but maybe familiar with AI, then they can have a voice in it too. Now they can say, they can opine. Well, maybe we can have this much regulation or this little regulation. Again, ultimately, we can't decide on that here, or even debate now. Okay, this must be the right balance, because it will depend on a lot of factors. And like I said, usually naman, especially sa laws, like other policies, or like what we did during the pandemic, sometimes we just copy what others are doing. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of our laws are based on laws in other countries. We just copied it basically, and it might happen. I mean, they will have regulations. They talk about this is an active discussion in other countries, in the USA. Ethics of AI, and ultimately will be influenced by that. But we can also decide based on our own experience, and that's why tayo, we have to work together. People who work in, I know some people may think of us as competitors, in the industry, but actually we should be working together. The field is too big anyway for
Yeah.
us to have to be
Yeah, I
to
think,
be competitors. Yeah, at this point in
those
time,
notions of
yeah,
competitiveness, wala pa. I don't, it's a drop in
wala
the
pa.
bucket. Wala pa
It's
tayo dun.
still wide open right now. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of work to be done in AI, machine learning, etc. And right now, we're just filling in small, bits of, in niche things that we can do, where we can help. So
Yeah.
there's competition is not yet a factor. Maybe it will be a factor in the future, pero so yeah, so that's my take on that. I don't know if that's helpful, but what I do know is we have a role to play. um UP itself has issued guidelines. I think kilala ko yung mga nagsulat ng guidelines on the use of AI, ethical use of AI. I don't know if you got a copy of that.
Yeah,
A
we
reporter
got
was
via AAP. We got a
okay,
copy.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, a reporter was going to interview me about that, but maybe in the future they'll talk about that.
Mm.
And we also have to educate not just the common people, but also the politicians who will be making these laws, the lawyers. We have to make them have a certain appreciation for what we are doing and what is being done.
Okay, I think that's probably a good place as any to end it for now. I want to thank Professor Guido David for joining us today. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having you again on another conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure. I was going to ask you what took you so all this time to enter. My doors are always open. Naman. No, I'm just kidding, but I know you're very busy then with your work, and I appreciate your work. Then, you know, your body of work. You know, throughout the pandemic and after, and now your advocacy. So, yeah.
Okay.